Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Dr. Sara Erdner. She is a clinical associate professor of kinesiology and as is a certified mental performance consultant. She works with coaches and athletes to help them navigate the mental demands of their performance environments. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form, Dr. Sara. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about athlete voices and mental health. You've also written a book on this. So we'll, dear coach, we'll come to that also and learn about the voices of other athletes and all. But before that, let's understand a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know who they are listening to.
Absolutely. So I'm a professor, first and foremost. So I teach applied sports psychology courses and coaching education courses. And I also do consulting for coaching education. So working one-on-one with coaches and with athletes just for them to help them get a better mental performance, take them from good to great. So, and my research pertains to the coach-athlete relationship and focusing more on the athlete perspective and what they wish they could have told their coach but never did.
Absolutely. So let's understand this. Means we get to hear all about the great performance of athletes. So how do they perform when they are not, they either don't speak or they are not listened to it? I want to understand that. Where is the problem there?
Yeah, so I think we're transitioning into an era where athletes want to be heard more. And so many of the voices, it started out with interviews for my dissertation, for my PhD. And what I thought was going to be 60-minute to 90-minute interviews turned into 2.5 hour, 3 hour long conversations where the athletes, it was uh, very apparent that I had untapped something that they had just they wanted to be heard. And within sport, it's a very unidirectional approach. It's the coach kind of telling the athlete what to do, and the athlete just has to adhere to what the coach says to be considered coachable, quote unquote. And that is leading some athletes to feeling not psychologically safe to express concerns or to share their opinions on how to make sport uh, individually better for themselves and then on a wider scale too.
Absolutely. But isn't this the system world over everywhere? You know, athletes are good. Athletes know about what they have to do, but they need some sort of guidance. Everywhere we need guidance. In every field we have like this. Even in Hollywood, you have got the director. All actors and they have to listen to the director. Otherwise, the movie will never be gotten made, or it will go from one place to another. And they have to listen. You see, even in any sports, you see, even in football, the coach decides. You know, soccer, the coach decides. Even in athletes, what is the problem here? I want to understand. You know that there is a set system. There are the organizations, sports organizations, and then there is, at least they know, if coaches start mollycoddling the athletes, they will never perform, you know. So they got to get things done. I understand the problem, but I'm trying to understand things from the ground. This is a set system. There is a system in place. There is a sports, there are the sports organizations. There is the government also involved into somewhere in this whole thing. Where is it that gap? Where is it that things are falling into the creek?
Absolutely. And the structure is there. So my book, Promoting Athletes' Voices on What They Wish They Could Have Said But Never Did, it also includes, thank you letters within there too. So the book itself isn't just bashing coaches. It's coming from a very empathetic approach, twofold. So the structure is there. So it's not saying that the coach doesn't necessarily have the final say, but it's just asking them to use a more humanistic approach of allowing the athlete's voice to come in and share their opinions, or the coach offering options for them to do. Like, hey, the goal for today is for us to enhance our layup, like in basketball, to enhance our performance with layups. We can do these three separate drills. Which would you prefer? So you're allowing the autonomy, the choice for the athlete to come in and feel like they have a voice. So it's not the coach dictating necessarily. But another thing for coaches too, structurally, is when you read between the lines of these letters, and this is where the mental health component comes in. I believe at an organizational level, we've done a pretty good job of athlete mental health initiatives, but we aren't helping coaches with their own mental health. We're just asking them to work many, many hours a week. They have families as well back home that they're not having time with. Maybe their team is performing well or it's not. And we're not providing them the same level of resources for them to feel psychologically safe, for them to feel emotionally and mentally healthy so that they can show up for their athletes as well. So it's about, yes, giving the athletes voice, but a lot of these letters, again, when you read between the lines, were the athletes empathizing with the coaches and understanding that sport is an organization. And again, with some cultures, there's the government that's also involved in that. In America, the government is not involved in sport, so there's a difference in systems there. With that being said, the coach is often forgotten about. They're just looked at as a means to an end, and the end is winning no matter what. And we have to realize that they're an entity in themselves that also matters.
Absolutely, absolutely, Dr. Sara. We'll come to your book also. One last thing to understand before this is that a lot of uh, these coaches, they are former players. So as players, they must be having those idea about the same things. But when they become coaches, do you think they try to change things, or they also become like their former coaches against which whom they must be having their own voices for them? Why is it that even former players, they also become the same sort of coaches?
Absolutely. What a great question. At a neurological level, we have something called mirror neurons in our brain, and that is the neuron that we mimic the behavior that we are acutely around and also long term around. So we often have athletes turn coaches, and they might make a pin in their head and say, I'm never going to act like this coach. I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to make my players feel like that. But on an implicit subconscious level, if we are not actively intervening on a coaching education level, on an explicit level, athletes will turn coaches and they'll end up becoming, to some degree, maybe not exactly like the coach that they were coached by, because that's all they've ever known. They haven't seen it otherwise. You could take this into familial relationships too. Like if your parents treated you a certain way, you're likely going to parent in the same way, unless you come in and intervene, processing those traumas in therapy, whatever that might be. So it's important for athletes to remember that there's a tendency for you to coach the way you were coached. And especially if you have a lot of coaches that didn't coach you well or you didn't prefer very much. This book, at the very end of Dear Coach, I offer some of my, I don't situate myself as the expert with a capital T. I am an expert in the field, but I want to start a conversation. I want to facilitate space for people to start reflecting on their coaching behaviors, being vulnerable with themselves and saying, "Ugh, yeah, I am kind of being like my former coach. What should I start doing, stop doing, or keep doing to make sure that to mitigate those effects so that I'm not imposing that on the athletes I'm currently working with."
Right, right. So, to understand things, what are the top three things you think that are the issues that athletes face from every aspect, and that should be, or that needs to be addressed on priority?
Yeah, I think a very massive umbrella one. So when I worked directly with athletes as a mental performance consultant, something I started running into is Almost 80 to 90% of their psychological issues in sport were being exacerbated by the coach. So they were having performance anxiety, but that was being exacerbated by the coach because the coach has their own anxiety they're projecting onto the athlete. They're having confidence issues, and that was being exacerbated by the coach. So this is where, again, reading between the lines of, I think if we intervene at the coaching education level by having coach mental health initiatives to where they are working through their own kind of twofold. So it's mental health initiatives working with like a licensed therapist, but also working with a mental performance consultant so that the coach can better have a game plan for how they're mitigating their own anxieties of the coach, their own confidence issues, their own focus issues, so that they're showing up to the game as a performer themselves and not accidentally projecting their own anxieties, their own fears onto the athletes. Because the coach has there's a level of accountability that the coach needs to have. So that's a very umbrella problem that can, if we're looking at the three things you said, the main things athletes deal with is I see athletes come to me mostly, they'll present with confidence issues that are underlined by either performance anxiety, motivation, or focus problems.
Right, Dr. Sara. If I understand, a lot of these sports bodies or even athletes, they have doctors around them, and doctors, psychologists also, to boost their morale and everything. Why is it that, or is it that they are not able to perform the job that they need to perform, or they are only focusing on the injury part, not on the mental injury possibly part? How would you like to look at their role so that the role opens for experts like you?
Absolutely. And one of those is that there isn't access. Not every organization does have access to a psychologist, or like at the university level in America, let's take the NCAA Division I level. So the highest kind of college ranking is not all of them have access to a psychologist or a licensed social worker. And if they do, there's only one for 500 athletes. So and there's really no way that they can give the same level of attention to every single athlete. So some of it is access. That is why I feel like we would actually be more efficient in the work that we're doing if we intervene at the coach level and do coaching education, because that's going to trickle down to the athletes. So us intervening at the athlete level, but not giving the level of resources needed for every athlete to have that, and it's also a band-aid approach. So we need to understand that the coach is also a very viable stakeholder in this, and we should also take care of them to the same degree.
Right, Dr. Sara. Now let's come to your book. What, dear coach, what I wish I could have told you. What is it yet that this book is all about? What is your inspiration of this book? What is it that you want to achieve from this book? And who is this book for? Though it is addressed to dear coach, but that is from the athletes. But your book, actually, who is this book for?
Absolutely. So I wrote Dear Coach. It started as a passion project in my PhD for my dissertation. And I was originally interviewing coaches. And almost every coach was like, while what we think is fine and dandy, we're really interested to know what the athlete wants from us. And that's when I shifted my dissertation to capture athlete voices. Those interviews were 2.5, 3 hours long of just story after story. And that's when my dissertation committee encouraged me to publish this in a book format like we see here. And these the way the book is written is actually I offer a letter and then I offer some journal prompts at the end, because one of my favorite quotes is, a book read by 1,000 different people is 1,000 different books. So I originally wrote it where I would give a letter and then I would tell the audience, the reader, what they should get out of that letter. And I didn't want to dictate to the audience what they should get out of it. The part 3 of the book is me offering my 2 cents if I was around a table talking about changes that we can make in sport. So the book is written obviously to coaches, so that's the primary audience. But I've also been working with businesses, on Wall Street in different organizations at the business level, because you could also superimpose this onto a Dear Boss letter, a Dear Sport Parent letter. So this book is actually written for coaches, but I've also had athletes reach out and say, wow, this book was so cathartic for me to read, because I realized I wasn't alone. There's a lot of other athletes that felt the same way as me, both positively and also not as productively. And so I really think anybody who reads this book is going to resonate, whether you're in sport or out of sport, and no matter what stakeholder, because everybody has played sport at some level, especially if you're reading it in the context of sport.
Right, Dr. Sara. So, what are the solutions you have provided in this particular book? Should they fire the coaches? Should coaches have mental examinations and understood whether they are letting they let athletes be vulnerable enough, that they are soft enough? I want to understand what sort of coach do they want?
Absolutely. My recommendations is to give empathy to coaches. So have a very humanistic approach toward coaches and realize how us as whether it's a society or organizations, have failed to provide coaches with the resources they need just as human beings. So it's not about, oh, let's do a mental assessment to see if you're mentally capable to be a coach. So then we're weaponizing mental health assessments against them on whether they're hired, retained, or fired. That is not what I'm recommending at all. I'm simply recommending that if we're going to have athlete mental health resources in play, we also need to have coaching mental health resources from a very empathetic approach. We're not going to use this against you in the hiring, retention, or firing process, but more, we acknowledge that your role as a coach is very, very stressful. That the time you're putting in, the travel, you're away from your family, maybe you have a sick mother and you can't be there with her as much as you want. We empathize with how hard your job is. And so we want to offer these resources to you, whether it's mental performance consulting to help the coach get from good to great and address their performance as a coach, or it's mental health therapy sessions where they can go and do maybe telehealth or meet in person to address some of the traumas. Some athletes came forward and said, yeah, our coach's wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer during our season, and we saw him struggle with trying to coach us at the same caliber he was, while also grieving the fact that his wife is potentially about to die. But there were no resources there in play to really support that coach through that. So what can we do as sports systems to let coaches know we see you and we want to be here for you as a human in and of yourself, not just as a means to an end?
Do you think some of these coaches are not so good coaches, or even not so good people, that who hires them, and what is the hiring process? Is it time that we question the hiring process? A lot of teams are also owned by businesses, if I understand. So help us understand, how does it work? Are they more focused on just winning? A lot of these athletes are also sponsored by big companies. Are they not also worried about the mental health of their athletes who they are sponsoring? So, is it that the coach is such a bad person, or is it because everybody's home situation is not so good that they are behaving like this? Or is it that there is a wrong system of hiring the coaches themselves? We see in sports, football, soccer, all the coaches behaving very aggressively on the, outside the field, on the sidelines, and people enjoy it. Those hysterics and whatever it is, people seem to enjoy it because they are so much involved in the game. Is it that the coaches are very much involved in athletes game, and then that is why they behave that way, that they want them to perform, they want them to succeed? This is where everyone will be actually judged on, either the athlete or the coach, even the businesses, everyone else. I'm trying to understand it from all this perspective, Dr. Sara.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. So, when a coach gets into an athlete's face very aggressively, like the behavior you were just talking about, they will get acute results, meaning very short-term results. They might get a good optimal play out of the next play or the second, but we don't see long-term optimal performance out of that. And we live in some societies, it's very microwave approach, like we want an immediate result. And so coaches have learned that, oh, if I yell at this athlete, I'll get what I want immediately, but they're actually, and they might, so it goes up a little bit and then it goes down. Versus if you actually create psychological safety and come in with that approach, that pedagogy as a coach, then you're going to see it might not necessarily be as steep of an incline, but you'll see a higher incline with less dips when you use less aggressive forms of coaching. Now, with the hiring, retention, and firing process, I'm glad you bring that up because I do think at a structural level, we should start asking more pointed questions of coaches and also evaluating them on these measures of psychological safety so that we're not just there's a quote about how we shouldn't make winning the pinnacle. We should make insert the word psychological safety, mental health, whatever, and then winning will be a residual effect of that. And so when we put winning at the center, we're actually decreasing our probability of achieving it. And so we need to make this shift, I think, within coaching. And this is where I want to call people into a conversation because I don't think it's necessarily assessing coaches on their mental health and firing them if they don't make 80%, right? But how can we also maybe, like for as a professor, I have end of the course evaluations from my students that I'm held accountable to. How might it shift if we actually have athletes doing the same for their coaches and giving end of the year evaluations? And I understand and having discussions on how we can safeguard the athletes, things like that, because it's a smaller pool of people. Maybe the coach can figure out who is who. So that's the conversation I think we need to start having when we can elevate the athlete's voice to say, hey, we care. We don't want you to just suffer at the hands of a coach who's coming in and getting away with abusive tendencies that we wouldn't allow. In my methods of coaching class, I'll always have a student in the back go, Dr. Erdner, I need a coach to get in my face and motivate me. And I will proceed to throw the book up against the wall. I'll go get in their face and yell at them and tell them, why didn't you make a fucking A on this last test? You're a disgrace to this class. And I go, are you more motivated now to show up for this class? And they're not, because we accept it within sport. And athletes learn that in order to be an athlete, you have to, they con themselves into believing they need that abuse for them to be able to psychologically perform in that space. But we wouldn't accept that same behavior in a classroom. I would be fired by the end of the week, probably. Why are we allowing those same abusive tendencies in sport? And while they do get acute performance, and that's what coaches see, we can shift this to where we're actually getting longer term, more upward trending optimal performance that isn't acute performance and then you get a dip.
Right, Dr. Sara. What is the extent of this problem? Is your sample size large enough to show that it's a very big sort of a trend, or is the sample size small enough, but enough to show the extent of the problem? What does your statistics say?
Yeah, so my sample size for this particular me getting to the fact of wanting to have coach mental health initiatives is probably after speaking with, gathering letters, doing research interviews with probably about 250 athletes. This is also in the American system. Some of them are international athletes from other countries, but we saw a massive theme across the athletes of, oh, you see them, whether they're in the sport or they're retroactively speaking about a coach, there's a level of empathy where they're angry in the beginning, but then they shift and they're empathetic because they start to realize that the coach doesn't have the resources they need. And if they were in the coach's shoes, they might be behaving in the way the coach was because they're frustrated with a system that's not supporting them. And so that's when I thought, let's write the book, Dear Coach. Let's start promoting this, advocating for coaches. So I wrote the book not to call coaches out, but to call them into a conversation very empathetically, using unconditional positive regard and saying, gosh, we've really failed you in a lot of ways as the coach. How can we show up for you and make you feel safer and more protected within your role?
Right. So, what is an ideal coach? And do you think now human coaches not? It's the time of artificial intelligence. All those advanced robots which will have all the data about individual athletes, and this AI coach will deal with the athletes as per the way they want. them to be they want to be dealt with. Do you think it's that time is not very far off, Dr. Sarah?
We'll see. I'm not really sure. It's definitely, I mean, as a professor, we have AI kind of impacting us too, of people saying things like, in 10 years, there won't be any professors because AI will be doing all of that. I think the thing with AI and coaches, like your question about the ideal coach, is it's both and. I don't want to throw winning under the bus because sport is tethered to that. That's what makes it fun. But when we become so fixated on winning as the outcome, like we're fixated on the outcome, and we chalk an athlete up to just their statistics, then we're saying they're just a number and we're dehumanizing them. And that's where a lot of the disconnect between where athletes are at is we're humans, we're emotional beings, we're thought beings, we're more than just a mechanical body that can get results. So if a coach can lean further into that humanistic side, and oftentimes that's them needing to lean into the human nature of themselves, which is where these mental health sessions, mental performance consulting sessions can help them connect with themselves humanistically first, so intrapersonally, and then they can better connect with another person on an interpersonal level from a humanistic standpoint. So that athlete, it's not saying throw the statistics out because those matter, obviously. The athlete's also in it for that too. But remember that they're a human on the same field. And a lot of, I think, coaches forget this because coaches are hired, retained, and fired based on statistics, based on win-loss. So if we can change those hiring, retaining, and firing processes to look at the humanistic side of things as how is the coach upholding that, and then how is the coach taking care of themselves, I think it'll hold coaches accountable to center their well-being in the narrative.
Absolutely. There's much to learn about all these things from you, Dr. Sarah. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more from you, learn more about things you are doing in this particular thing, and also learn from your book. What is the best way for them to connect with you?
Absolutely. So my website is dearcoachbook.com. I also want to highlight that on the front homepage, when you go to that, if you scroll down a little bit, there's a free ebook, so an electronic book download for you. So it's free to you. Click on that link for the free download. So if you have an ebook reader, or even on your phone, you can download the book for free to you. Or if you want to buy it in bundle, you can do that as well. But dearcoachbook.com is the easiest way to access me. You can complete like a contact form on there, or I also offer my email.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.